up a couple of things we've been talking about. We've been talking about IFAKs and the way that our philosophy on IFAKs and the way that we're redesigning or we're considering the redesign of IFAKs both on the civilian side and also on JJ's side in the military, and getting away from some of the traditional setup for the IFAK. I think some of this will be voodoo for a lot of people. It's going to be tough for them to get their heads around. But if you stick with it and stick with us, I think you'll understand by the end of this. And remember, this is just a way. It's not the way. It's just a way to do it. It's a way that we think might work. And it's an evolving process, right? So,
absolutely. And to be fair, it's hard for me to swallow some of this as well, right? So this is a problem set that I came across and just started noticing it was a repeated issue, and was like, hey, I've got to figure out what to do with it. And I'm probably not at the 95% solution. We're probably closer to like the 80, but we're at least, I think the key is that we're willing to be critical of our own processes and take another look at it.
Well, I think, one of the big things that I've already done just by messing around with it is changing up what I carry on my March belt, and changing up the components has actually given me more room in my aid bag, because stuff that I've carried in my aid bag, I'm now carrying on my belt because it makes perfect sense actually to carry it there, which freed up room in the aid bag. So we have another recording. We actually are doing this backwards. We did a pretty extensive video last night with Sean and Justin as well on this topic, where we went into more of the specifics exactly of what we're carrying and a little bit more into the science behind it, or the philosophy and the studies behind why we're changing up some of the stuff. But we didn't really set any backstory, and we wanted to record this one first, get it out so that people understand the backstory before we release the other one and say, oh, by the way, this is what we're doing on our IFAKs. We want you to have an understanding. So
yeah, that's perfect. And I think one of the things we want to do is make sure you guys realize that we're not I'm not downgrading or denigrating the TCCC process. I think it was, especially when it came out, was phenomenal. It was a huge curve jump. But my fear, anytime you start jumping curves, is we get super excited and all of us want to kind of pat ourselves on the back and take a break.
Right.
Right. And so I think that's kind of what all of us have done. If you look at prolonged field care, the reason it punched us in the face is for that exact reason. And then we kind of, we're on that train now, which is great. But in that process, that's where our focus has been primarily. And
well,
so
I think it's been a developing process in general.
Yeah.
It started out with, when Hartford Consensus came out, it started out with tourniquets.
Yep.
And then we realized, well, the data that they were using for tourniquets came from the military. And in the civilian side, we're not running around, unless we're on a SWAT team or something like that, we're not running around with body armor on. So we're seeing a lot of injuries in the box as opposed to the extremities. So tourniquets, if you start reading AARs for all the active shooter events in the last 15 years, the frequency of tourniquet application on extremities is almost negligent. It's negligible. So I think we're progressing and we're learning. It's just hard.
Yeah.
I still see people carrying a shit ton of tourniquets, and that's okay, but just realize that you're probably not going to need them. You could be using that space for something else that you're probably going to need.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the problem, right? And once we get all this stuff figured out, the data is going to change, or the problem set's going to change. We experienced that with COVID and how we thought we had a lot of things in the medical field figured out, and now we're back to square one, right? So it's always going to happen. Good old black swan factors, right? But either way, we can kind of plan for the best. And so with that, kind of some of the things you're going to hear us talk about in the next one are things like, maybe removing your needle Ds from your IFAK, right? And so that's a mindset of, I think what happened with that and with like the NPA is, like we were talking about before, Brad, like I think that we got rid of the OPA because we realized that was a problem and it was causing issues or whatever. And we just felt like we had to put something in its place, right? And sometimes when you just because you remove something doesn't mean you have to switch it out. Sometimes you do, right? But a lot of us are looking at going, what's wrong with good old fashioned left lateral, you know, and putting something in the recumbent and doing that? Is that MPA gonna really do much? And I'm open to some of the listeners, you know, challenging me and saying, hey, we definitely need it. I will say that if you are going to keep it, that's fine, but let's put the I back in IFAK, right? So remember that an IFAK is for that individual. Now, I'm not saying that individual should be using it. It's not to be used by that individual, because the medic should be the one actually opening that puppy up and using it on them. That's why it's there. But it's for that individual. So measure that person, figure out what their NPA needs to be, what size it needs to be, and put that exact sizing in his IFAK, and not just this universal 28 or whatever you're putting in there.
Right.
To me, that just makes sense.
Yep. Well, it would be like, you know, same thing with an IV catheter. Just pick a middle of the road IV catheter, which we know isn't always, it's not the best choice.
Yeah, but it's
sized for a reason. NPAs are sized for a reason.
Exactly.
Everybody has different anatomy. So arbitrarily grabbing a 28, throwing it in there, you know, just like you said, just to have something, it's probably not, we think we're doing the right thing, but I think we're doing a disservice to the patients as opposed to something positive for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's that's the thought process I have, at least when I'm looking at like, why do we need to change the IFAKs? And I think we've already looked at this a couple of times. So although it sounds really crazy, it's not that different than what we've done already. Most of us know that an aid bag not too long ago very much reflected a pile of IFAKs, kind of either spread apart or put together in one larger bag. And now we're seeing a little bit less of that. And we're seeing the emergence of the almighty March belt, which we all love. Right. And you'll hear us talking about it in the near future, but even that almost became a belt version of the old aid bag in some ways, where it's really more, we're looking at, can each of these pieces be like handling a slightly different phase of care, right? So ideally that IFAK is truly the first aid kit, right? So the March belt really almost becomes the second aid kit, right, if you will, like an ISAK. Sure. Patent pending, yeah. Trademark release. Now you can get yourself like a fanny pack that's now your ISAK, right? And it takes care of that second stage. And also covers some of the heavy hitters that you need right away. And again, I won't double tap a lot of stuff, but this kind of gets you the idea of what we're thinking and how we're approaching this.
Yeah, no, the traditional March belt is, again, it's like you said, it was an aid. It's a lot of people. I know a lot of guys that are still carrying aid bags that are stuffed and busting at the seams, and you got to stand on them to be able to zipper them up.
Yep.
I also know some guys that are carrying March belts that their belts are just absolutely jammed with stuff that, you know, was in the aid bag and isn't, you know, and
yeah,
should be on your potential patient. So
right.
A civilian SWAT team. So it should be on your SWAT your operators should have that equipment on them and leaving you room. So you have your IV stuff, you have some airway stuff, some invasive airway, or at least more advanced airway stuff than just which we're not carrying.
Absolutely. Or like a pelvic binder, because I don't think I'm going to convince any of my operators to slap a pelvic binder somewhere on their kit, right? Even if I did, most of them, unless they're, you know, the really big gorillas, don't have the body surface area to put it on there anyway. They've got a lot of other things they got to carry. So by like streamlining what I'm putting into their IFAK and really focusing on the pieces of the March algorithm that I need to meet immediately in that individual stage, kind of makes it so that I can have those anomaly pieces, right? Because the likelihood of all of the patients getting a junctional injury that I have to fix with a pelvic binder or a junctional tourniquet, pretty low.
Right.
Possible, but low, right? So then, but I still have to have it, because if it does happen, it's a huge freaking problem, and I've got to address it like right now. So kind of things like that is the process that I'm looking at.
Well, I
to
mean,
make that
we have the IFAK and things that you want to do, right? Stop the bleeding.
Yep.
We got to worry about some sort of an airway. And the other big thing that nobody thinks of is we need to get access.
Right.
I mean, because if they're bleeding and they're in shock, they need blood.
Exactly. So you really need to
Carry,
stop ignoring the C, right? Because right now we have like a MAR belt or a MARFAC.
right.
Yeah. So the C piece I think is huge. And you'll hear me later talk more about like how I think that affects our providing meds as well. So there's that. And also then that frees up some space where you can do some other things. Like I don't think there's an IFAK out there that I see that addresses the H.
No.
But now that we are looking at making some space, we can maybe address that. Especially because I think a lot of us are pretty fast to expose, even in those initial stages of TCCC. And you can't exactly like put his clothes back together.
Right.
Not a lot of guys running around like, other than me maybe, with pants that like Velcro off and then you can Velcro them back on because I hate wearing clothes. But so on average now they're super exposed and even more naked and more apt to be cold. So slide an emergency blanket or something like that in there. We've got a little more space to do that.
Yep. Now, have you started doing this, or are you still playing around with it?
I'm still kind of playing around with it. I probably should have brought my vacuum sealer with me. That's the problem I run into. So I've already started to fuss with some other things, like see what I have on hand. So like I took even just my traditional minor surge kit. Now, obviously I realized that not your everyday medic is out there running around with a minor surge kit, but like I've got enough to take care of all your like vessel bleeds. I've got shunts in here. I've got vessel loops, all that kind of stuff. Used to be, and this is empty, by the way, just to give you an example of how big it was, just empty. It's like super fat compared to this skinny guy. And still the same size, everything else. So you can imagine if it was full, we're looking at like I could usually barely Velcro it. So let's see if I can get you a visual. Like it's like that. Look how fat that thing is.
Yeah.
And so just by minor repackaging, rethinking, I didn't take anything really out other than maybe some plastic, some other things. But that's kind of what I'm doing with all my kit right now while I'm here at the hospital. So I should have brought some other stuff with me maybe. But yeah, I've been looking at it. Once I have a halfway solution, I'm going to run myself through some like basic runs, and just see how that works and what am I missing, I'll probably have like you or Sean write up a quick scenario. That way I'm not pre-war gaming it.
Sure.
And just be like, hey, John, run through this, right? And then we'll just see how it works and how much faster I am. But I have a feeling that I'm going to be faster. And if nothing happens from any of this, other than we get medics out there to even just use the items in the patient's IFAK first,
right,
then I think mission has been accomplished at least 50 to 60% at that point.
Yep.
Because right now what's happening is there's way more aid equipment out there on the battlefield than is actually being used. And I'll quick do a minor segue to some future conversations that we're probably going to have in a different podcast about CBRN stuff. And so if you are truly using the IFAKs the way they should be, when there's a CBRN or CBRN incident, the likelihood of you have exposed your aid bag and your March belt stuff to the chemicals is drastically lower, especially if you're using some fancy bags out there. Crow and a few other people have some bags that are pretty good at avoiding being able to be, exposed to the CBRN environment. So you've got that option, right? But if you think about it, once you're in that environment, now everything you've opened is now exposed to
right.
the chemicals. And so you're going to have to take all that stuff off eventually through the decon process.
Sure.
What are you replacing it with? Right? If you haven't used their IFAK's already going to be exposed. So you may as well use that now and then move on to hopefully your aid bag and other things that you can switch out with. So that's kind of a concept. And that's, I'll be honest, that is part of the other thing that drove me to heavily relook at how I'm carrying and how I'm doing load carries, because I have found myself accidentally exposing everything I had in my aid station to chemicals, and had to think about, oh fuck, now what?
Sure.
To keep using it and everything else. So that's kind of the thought process in that. So no, to long answer to a short question. So I'll shorten answer. No, it's not fully tested yet, but I have at least begun that process.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Anything else to address before we get so this one by the time that when they see this, they'll probably be about half a week or a week before the one we did last night comes out, which is the more detailed one. So I don't know, anything else you want to throw in as far as just gear considerations, just being, I'll use the word anti-fragile, and being able to, move more efficiently and act more efficiently.
I think we've kind of covered most of it. The only other thing I'll say is, like, I think that we really need to look again at access, rescue, and evacuation.
Sure.
And like, how are we prepped to take care of that as medics? Because I'll just say that I definitely have not been as prepared as I should have been several times, and that's pretty lame, being the guy that's heavily involved in element rescue and all these other things. And I fixed myself, but I'm just saying, historically, I think I was underprepared quite a few times, and maybe that's what makes me good at it now. I don't know, but bottom line is, I think that we have heavily ignored that piece.
I think when we do the third segment of this topic and talk about aid bags, I think that's, now that we're making room in the aid bags by moving some stuff out onto our belts and in IFAKs that the operators are wearing, we're making more room, so now we can carry some other things.
Yep, I agree. And I think that's the big thing. And all of this is really pointing towards, like, being super efficient at TCCC so that we can be even better at the resuscitation piece.
Sure.
And then getting the patients out of there, right? And I think by doing this, that's what we're going to prep ourselves, and we're going to be able to really think about that resuscitation. Because we keep saying words, and you'll hear us talk about it before, that we say resuscitation before intubation, but yet we put C after A and R,
right?
And just thought those kind of thought processes, and we put very minimal effect or influence on the C part in most of TCCC, and yet we keep saying intubate after. So that's kind of the mindset that we're attacking, I think.
All right, sounds good. So this will be now that we're doing videos. I'm actually I haven't done it yet, but they'll be, and we'll send it out over social media and everything else. We're actually going to have a YouTube account. So this will end up on YouTube. So comments, put them in the comment section. That'll be down below. And this is kind of weird. I watch people doing this on YouTube, and now down below. And
subscribe up here.
Subscribe there. I don't know. We'll figure it out.
I'm not a weatherman, so.
Yeah. So, put your comments down below, and myself or JJ, Sean, we'll all have access to the comment section. So hopefully we can get some dialogue going and just discuss. And, I think this video series we did the podcast. We've done a bunch of podcasts. We haven't didn't keep up with it as much as I wanted to, but we're just busy. There's no time to be doing that stuff. So hopefully with the videos, I think the videos will be a little bit better. So, so keep an eye out for that. And like I said, give us another week or so, and you'll see the second part of this discussion with all four of us talking about actually how and what we want to configure the March belts and IFAKs with. So with that, I'm going to let you guys go. And peace out.